better life for you. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. All right, so as I shared with you last week, we are continuing our series in Proverbs, and we're getting close to the end. We've been at it a year now, off and on, and we have taken some time to do some other things, but we've been going through Proverbs, and the idea to begin with was chapter to chapter, but then we figured out that didn't work too well after you got to pass about chapter 9 or 10. So we're just doing the topical type of study in Proverbs. And last week we started talking about Proverbs and money. And that's what we're going to talk about again today, and it's what we're going to talk about again next week, because as I shared with you, there's a whole lot of stuff in the Bible about money, and for the last 8 years that we've been doing this, I have not preached any sermons directly on money, so I'm going to catch up in these next 2 or 3 weeks, okay? So the big topic will come next week about tithing and giving, and that's always a fun topic to talk about in church, and because you always ruffle feathers no matter what you do, and some people think you're not hard enough on it, some people think you're too easy on it. Well, you know, nobody's ever happy when we talk about tithing and giving, but it's something we need to talk about. It's something that's very, very important in the Christian life and in the life of the church. I had an aunt and an uncle. Uncle Brooks was what is his name. His Clarence Brooks Street was his actually his name, and Aunt Catherine was his wife. And Uncle Brooks and Aunt Catherine, you know, they were born in the early 1900s. Actually, I think Uncle Brooks was born in like 1898 or something like that. So when I was a young man, he was an old man. But every once in a while, our family, and not only just with them, but throughout the years, our family would have discussions and talking about money in church and tithing and giving and different things like that. And one of the things that came up one time, and I thought this was pretty funny, and I didn't hear Aunt Catherine say this, but I was told that Aunt Catherine said this at one time, because that the church was funny when it came to money. Now, it was funny when it came to money because it would say one thing and have one principle, but then it may kind of practice something else. And I've seen that in churches. But in her particular case, it was because of her job. Because Aunt Catherine worked in a distillery. Okay? Kentucky bourbon. Some of you know Kentucky bourbon. That she worked in a distillery. She was in the office. I'm not sure what she did, but probably because of her age in that time, she was probably a secretary in the office or some type of little office manager or something like that. And she would get criticized from people at church because how could you work in a distillery? You know, because in her church culture, that was, you know, almost borderline. People would question about whether that was a sin or not, that she worked there. And so they would criticize her, they would be critical of her because of where she worked. But one of the things that Aunt Catherine said was that the church never cared then once she put her tithe into the offering plate. And her point was, people have different ideas, but when it comes to money, usually all those ideas go out the door. They didn't care where her tithe came from, they just wanted that money, but they cared where she worked. And I tell you that story because there's not really a point in the story, but it's just the point of the story is simply this, that we have different ideas and we have different thoughts and we have different experiences. You know, I was in a church that I served as an interim in the church. As an interim youth minister, so I worked with teenagers at church. I was there about 7 months, and when I was there, they had an interim pastor, and he was an older gentleman as well, and it was a church that had 2 services on Sunday morning. Each service had about 350 people in it, big church. He required all of us that were on pastoral staff to sit up on stage behind him. So there was a row of chairs. There was choir loft. There was a row of chairs in front of that choir loft, and we had to sit there through both services. And I have to tell you, it was tough to sit through one of his sermons because, you know, I wanted to do this. But to sit through 2 of them and keep awake was really tough. But he required that. And he required that because he wanted everybody to see how the pastoral staff supported him in the ministry. But the other thing he did, which I thought was really odd, but it came back to money again, was this particular church, when you came to church and you started attending regularly, if you joined the church, they would give you offering envelopes. They would give you one for every week of the year. So 52 envelopes. They give you a box with 52 envelopes in it. And on the envelope, you had an assigned number, but that's all they did. It's just a assigned number. Hey, Pradeep, can you go help them with the TV over there? They had an assigned number, but you had to fill out your name, your tithe, your extra giving. There was also little boxes on there, did you read your Bible on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday? Did you pray? And you check all these things off. That was okay. I didn't have any problem with that. But what I had a problem with was he told us every service, whether you do this or not, it's up to you, but not whether you do it or not, but whether you put anything in the envelope or not. But every service we were required to have one of those giving envelopes in our pocket. And we were supposed to wear a shirt like this, put it in the pocket so everybody could kind of see the top of it hanging out here. So everybody knew we were prepared to give. And then when the offering baskets came around, because unlike us, we just put an offering basket back there. We don't pass it out during the service. You were supposed to take that envelope, even if there was nothing in it, and put it in the offering bag. And I always wondered, to me, that didn't feel like it had much integrity to it. Because I was making people believe I was giving when I wasn't giving. Now, I will tell you, some of those offering envelopes did have money in it. Some of them didn't, okay? But the point was, we were so focused on the money that we were using deception to try to get more people to give. And this is a church. See, last week, we talked about you need to have a proper perspective when it comes to money. And it's not just us as individuals, but it's us as churches. It could be you and your business. It could be many, many different things. And when we don't have that proper perspective, sometimes we start rationalizing things. We start saying, oh, well, this is good because I do this. Oh, it's good that I put an empty envelope in there because I'm encouraging other people to give. I have to admit, I've always had a problem with that. Maybe I need to go to God and confess that. To God, I went ahead and did that because I didn't take a stand up against it. But we do that. In Proverbs, Solomon gives us guidelines, gives us things to think about, things to consider about how we handle our money. Let's just quickly review some of the things I just reviewed about already. We said scriptures are very clear about the inherent connection between a person's spiritual life, attitudes, actions concerning money and possessions. As I shared with you last week, that's not me writing that. I stole that from a commentary because I don't talk like that, but it's still a very good statement. There is a connection. Everything in life seems to be connected to money in one way or one form. A lot of conversations are there. A lot of the Bible that talks about money or wealth or finances or possessions, things like that. When we talk about Proverbs, there's over 130 different references to money, wealth, prosperity, those type of thing in Proverbs. So we're not, like I say, we're not doing all 130 of those, but we are going to look at a few of them. Money is very important. Now, when we talk about money and we talk about how important it is, I happened to think about something actually this morning, and I thought about the first movie that my oldest son Joshua ever saw. Okay, and he was about 1.5 years, 2 years old when he saw it. It was probably 2013, 2014, and it was a movie that came out in 2012. It was called The Lorax. Okay, anybody ever seen The Lorax by Dr. Seuss? There was a really old one that was, when I was a kid, and then there's the new version of it. New version's much better. But in the new version of The Lorax is about a man that comes in. He harvests all the trees because he's making scarves out of I forgot what they call it, but the kind of the hair of the tree. It's weird looking trees, okay? But he makes scarves out of them. Everybody wants a scarf, and he ends up harvesting all the trees, so then you have all kinds of pollution, you have, all the animals go away, all these things happen. And the Lorax himself is someone who is there who is kind of like his conscience saying, you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be doing this. Well, at one point, the man who's harvesting, he sings a song. And I'm not going to sing the song, but here's what the song says. How bad can I be? I'm just doing what comes naturally. I'm just following my destiny. How bad can I possibly be? And then I'm going to skip on down. It says there's a principle in business that everybody knows is sound. It says that people with the money make this ever-loving world go round. I'm biggering my company. I'm biggering my factory. I'm biggering my corporate sign. Everybody out there, take care of you, and me, I'll take care of. And then he says, mine, 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 mine. Okay? I'm building an economy. Just look at me petting this puppy. A portion of proceeds goes to charity, so how bad can I possibly be? All the customers are buying, all the money's multiplying. PR people are lying and lawyers are denying. Who cares if a few trees are dying? See, he didn't have a proper perspective of what was going on. He didn't have a proper perspective of his money. And when we talk about Scripture, we need to have that proper perspective. Our wealth, our use of our wealth, our money must be kept in proper perspective. And we read these verses. This is the only prayer offered in Proverbs. And I didn't put the first verse of the prayer in it, but this is Agar, and Solomon included this in his Proverbs because he thought this was a very good thing, a very useful thing. And it's a prayer, and it's a prayer to keep proper perspective. Remember it said, keep falsehood and lies far from me. Give me neither riches nor poverty, or give me neither poverty or riches, but give me only my daily bread. So, in other words, give me what I need, Lord. Okay? But don't give me too much or don't give me too less. Otherwise, in verse 9, it says, I may have too much and disown you. Because when things are going well, usually that's when we start forgetting about God. It's when things turn really bad that we start turning to God and pleading out to God, oh, God, help me, everything else, okay? So he says, I may disown you and say, who is the Lord? Or I may become poor. Become so poor, I become desperate, and I start stealing, and so dishonor the name of the Lord. So he's saying, hey, give me a proper perspective on my money. Give me a proper perspective on my resources. Help me to manage it wise. Help me to have what I need, but not too much that gets me distracted. And so we said there was a couple other things, and the couple of things that we said were simply this, that wealth is the greatest competitor for our heart. And we read that verse in Matthew where Jesus said, that you can't serve two masters. You can't serve money and God. You have to choose one or the other. And so we need to choose to serve God. We need to choose to serve our life for God because money can be a competitor. And I think that's why it's talked about so much in the Bible. And then we said this, if wealth distracts you or causes you to live and not act in righteousness, then it's better not to have wealth. And none of us want to hear that because secretly all of us want to have wealth. I've told you last week, I met one person that always claimed they didn't want to have any wealth. Never did believe them, okay? But we all want that. We all want that. Some of us, our wanting of wealth is more related to the prayer we read. Give us this day our daily bread. And we want enough to survive. We want enough to do the things we want to do, but we may have a different idea from God about how much is enough. That's what I constantly tell God. God, you say this is enough, but I think we need to raise that bar a little bit, okay? And so we do that, but God says, be content. Be where you are. And so we say, hey, if wealth distracts you, if it causes you to lie, to cheat, to hurt other people, whatever else it is, then it's better not to have that. Now, I liked what Rockefeller said. Rockefeller was kind of the pioneer of oil and gas business. And if you read his biography, he lived almost 100 years. At one point, he was the richest man in the world. And when he talked about wealth, he said this. He says, it's wrong to assume that men of immense wealth are always happy. He had immense wealth. A lot of the national parks and a lot of things about national parks in the U.S. were because he bought that land, donated it to the government, and said, here's a national park. Okay? A lot of other things. He gave a lot of money away in his older life. But he said, hey, money is not what makes you happy. Now, when you look at Rockefeller, when you look at what he did business-wise, you would question about whether he was a Christian or not. But he always claimed to be a Christian, always talked about God. always talked about how you live your life. And we'll get a little bit in this next week, but one of the things he said is he said, no matter how much money you make, you always take 10%, give it to God, you take 10%, you save it, and you live on the 80%. And he said in that 80%, you need to find ways to give it away too, if you can. But he said you always have that principle. His children, he taught them that growing up. That's what they had to do. And there were some other things, but we'll talk about a little bit of that next week. But I got another quote or two for you with Rockefeller later, because I kind of liked a lot of things he had to say. So this is about Rockefeller and who Rockefeller is and what Rockefeller is all about, okay? All right, so now, when we talk about this and we talk about how it is better to manage our money, I want to go to some verses in Haggai. And Haggai says this. Well, actually, I want to go to this first verse. It says, the blessing of the Lord brings wealth, and he adds no trouble to it. I want you guys to understand, because I've heard passages, I've heard preachers preach sermons in churches I've been in and online, and I even read some of the commentaries that just focuses so much on that, how wealth can be evil. Remember we read that verse last week, that the love of wealth is evil, not wealth itself. But that if you got a lot of money and you're not doing this or doing that and doing that with money, then you're sinning against God. I want you to hear this. That's not biblical. In fact, what happens when you look through the Bible? You start with Abraham. Was Abraham wealthy? Yeah. God blessed him. Many flocks, many sheep, much land. Okay? He blessed him physically. There was lots of wealth there. You go all the way through the Old Testament, story after story, and you find they're wealthy, they're wealthy, they're wealthy, wealthy. God has blessed them with physical wealth. So physical wealth, having lots of money, having lots of possessions and things like that is not necessarily a bad thing. But it is, what do you do with it? Because this last part of it, what does it say? It says, he, being God, adds no trouble to it. Okay? He adds no trouble to it. And I thought about that. That's so good. Because God gives you wealth in order for you to use it to advance the kingdom of God. And he says, if you use it in the right way, you're not going to have trouble with it. It's going to be a good thing. So, it's going to be a good, wealth can be a good thing. It is a blessing from God. It can bring a little bit of happiness here. It can bring a little bit of joy here, a little bit of fulfillment here, but we don't base our lives on that. In Haggai, chapter 1, verse 1, Haggai was addressing the people, okay? They had come back to Jerusalem. They were building their homes and things like that. Let me go. Verse 2, it says this. This is what the Lord Almighty says, the people say, the time's not come for the Lord's house to be built. Okay? So, they were building up their own houses, but the temple was still in ruins. And whenever anybody questioned about it, they would say, oh, the time's not right. The time is not now. Then here's what God says. It says in verse 3, it says this, then the Lord came to the prophet Haggai and said, is it a time for you yourselves to be living in paneled houses while my house remains a ruin? So God is questioning them. God is saying, hey, you guys you're coming back to Jerusalem. You're gathering back together. Life is good. Prosperity is good. You're building your houses, paneled houses, so they're nice, fancy houses. Okay? You've got a good life, but yet you have neglected the church. Now, look what it says here in verse 5. This is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. This is the key verse today. Give careful thought to your ways. Look at the next verse. You have planted much, but you have harvested little. You eat, but never have enough. You drink, but never have your fill. You put on clothes, but are not warm. You earn wages only to put them in a purse with holes in it. So basically what's he saying to them? You're not managing your money well. You're not using it the way it should be used. You're not considering your ways. Okay? I thought about this, and I thought about back when I was single, and when I was single, and I met with one of my financial advisors, and my financial advisor said, you're single. Now's the time to be saving. And I agreed with him, so I saved some, but I only saved about half as much as what my financial advisor said I should save. And I thought, now I look at this verse and I said, okay, I had a purse with holes in it, okay? Now some of it was good because some of it, I did give away and did do different things with it. But we need to consider our ways. So we're going to look at some Proverbs. How does Proverbs talk about considering our ways, okay? Consider your ways regarding wealth. Well, the first thing is simply keep this in mind, that wealth has its limits, okay? In my own life, other people have said it, if I only had this, then I would be happy in life. If I only had the new iPhone, 44, I would be happy in life. But then what happens? The iPhone 45 comes out the next day and you're not happy anymore. Okay, yeah, I know we're only on 15, but it just seems like every time you turn around, there's another one, right? Right? It's not going to make you happy. It can be a good tool, but it has its limits. Look what this verse in Proverbs says. It says, wealth is worthless in the day of wrath. Meaning, there's going to come a time where wealth is worthless. Okay? I had a conversation with someone here in Taiwan about 3 weeks ago. It was during Chinese New Year's. And the conversation was about things here in Taiwan and how their wealth was all based in Taiwan, and they were concerned about what might happen in the future, if somebody may come from somewhere else and invade Taiwan and things like that. And they said, I have property, so that property will no longer be mine. All my wealth will be gone. Possibly my bank accounts and things like that. And so they were talking about maybe, how they need to diversify some of their wealth and maybe move some of their wealth off the island and things like that too. And I thought, well, okay, yeah, it's a good idea. But see, wealth will fail us eventually. He says in the day of wrath. Well, it may fail you before that too. It will have no value. There was an old TV show, again, when I was a kid, and it was called Little House on the Prairie. And it was kind of back then it was on mainline TV, but if you look at it now, it kind of seemed like a corny little show. But on one of the shows, there was a story about a family that lived in mid-America out on the prairies, and they were farmers, and they were just trying to make ends meet and everything else, and all the things they had to go through. And it was a fun, kind of cute little family show type of thing. But one of the shows, they got a telegram that one of their ancestors or one of their relatives had passed away, and he owned a large stage company. So like stages, behind horses, carried people and carried goods and things like that. That's what they built. So it'd be like owning a car manufacturing company now. And he owned that. And he was a wealthy man, and he owned that, and he had passed away, and he had no children or anything else. So this particular family inherited his kingdom, inherited his wealth, inherited everything who he's about. So they got to looking into it. They got all excited. People in the little small town of, a few hundred people, they got all excited. They bought a new piano for the church. They bought this, they bought that, all on credit because they were going to get all this money, okay? And they were all looking into it, and they were all excited about it. But then the day came when the money was delivered to them. And a wagon pulls up. The stage company had been sold. All the debts paid off. Pretty much, the selling of the company paid off the man's debts. But he had these trunk loads of money. So they brought the trunk loads in of money. Everybody's excited. They opened up the first trunk, and there was a problem. There was money in it, but it was Confederate money. So before before the American Civil War, the states were divided. The northern states and the southern states. The southern states were called the Confederate States. They had their own money. But when the Civil War was over and the North won, what value was the Confederate money? About like this. About like going to the junk store and buying the pack of fake 1,000 NT bills. That's how much it was worth. Their idea and concept of money had failed them. And that happens to us so much. So don't let it fail you. Don't let it, don't put your trust in money and think that money is going to help you to get what you want or help you to do what you need to do, okay? It will fail you one day. It has its wealth. There's only so much you can do with it, no matter how much you have. It cannot buy you happiness. It cannot buy you a sense of purpose. It cannot buy you fulfillment in life. Only a righteous life will do that. And the second thing is to consider is we need to manage our wealth wisely, okay? Look at this. A stingy man is eager to get rich and is unaware that poverty awaits him. There are promises in Proverbs. There's promises all through the Bible that if you're stingy with your wealth, with your resources, you're going to lose it eventually. You're not going to have it, okay? So he says, consider your ways. Are you using it wisely? And are you doing with it what you should do? Next one. In managing our wealth wisely, we need to be generous with our wealth, okay? Now, that doesn't mean give away everything you have, but you ought to be generous in it. And we talk about being generous, generous simply means is giving and looking for opportunities to share, looking for opportunities to help people, okay? So we have a verse, generous man will prosper. He who refreshes others himself will be refreshed. I like that. You'll prosper. In other words, God will see that, and God will reward that in your life. You will be refreshed. Sometimes money helps people. Sometimes people are in a really tight spot. I never shared this with you, but before COVID, and Nancy and I had some extra expenses for a couple of months, and we had drained our accounts. And we were looking, we still had about a half a month to go, and this literally, I was thinking, well, am I going to have to ask my father-in-law, for a loan, and just to make it to the end of the month? Am I going to have to dig into, our long-term savings and things like that to make it to the end of the month? And I was just really concerned about it, and I was praying about it, and it was bothering me, and that I have to admit, it was getting me down because I was just like, God, we've been faithful, we're making good decisions, but we're just short. What are we going to do? And came to church that Sunday and been praying about it, but put it out of my mind. I was going to, have a good time with you. We were over there in that little room over there, and we went through church service, and I tried to end service, and I remember Ann or somebody says, no, you can't end service yet. I was like, well, why not? We don't have anything else planned. And you guys all gave me a little picture. I still have that picture. It's on my desk at home about one of the fellowships we had with everybody gathered around. And you gave us an envelope. I'm going to cry because it refreshed me so much because it was exactly what we needed to pay our bills and make it to the end of the month. See, God refreshes others through what you have. And then what will happen is God will take that and turn it around and will refresh you as well. You may think, it's hard to give. But once you give and see how it works and what it does, it's refreshing to you. So remember that, okay? Be generous in your giving. All right, next thing, save aptly. Now, it sounds like, I'm contradicting myself here. I'm telling you to be generous, but I'm also telling you to save. Well, it's important that we save, and it's important that we do. The wise have wealth and luxury, but fools spend whatever they get. And he's saying, hey, don't give away everything. Don't just spend money because you got it in your pocket. Don't have holes in your pocket. Consider what you have. Save a little bit, okay? I like that Rockefeller 10-10-80 rule. Save 10%, give 10% to God, and live on the rest of it, no matter where you're at. There's other stories of people throughout history that have done that. And one of the things that Rockefeller talks about was that he did that because his mom forced him to do that. Not his dad, but his mom. His mom was a faithful churchgoer, and when he talks about when he made his first little bit of money, she said, this is great. Now you take a part of this and you take 10% of this and you give to church on Sunday. And I think he said it was 13 U.S. cents that he gave to church that Sunday or something like that. But it was something she'd instilled in him and something that he continues to practice all his life. So he saved it because he took another 10% because she said that's what you need to do. Okay? And you save that 10% as well. So you save your money, you give away your money. It's all part of what we need to consider in our life. And now the next thing is we need to keep greed in check. Okay? We need to keep greed in check. Now, when we talk about greed, greed is simply this. It's a selfish, maybe excessive desire for something more. In other words, more money, more things, more friends, more possessions. You can apply it to a lot of different things. And he says in Proverbs, we need to keep our greed in check. Look at this. A greedy man stirs up dissension, but he who trusts the Lord will prosper. You may experience this. I've seen it some in my family history. I've seen it with other people. I've heard other stories about it. Sometimes families, when there's a death in the family, will start fighting because of greed. Because they want more of the money. They want more of the estate. We had a situation in my family where my grandfather and grandmother died. And, you know, they were, like I said, they were born in the early 1900s. Their house was full of, they kind of collected things. My grandfather, when he retired, he liked to go to what was called estate sales. So somebody else passes away, he would go there and maybe buy things. Well, there were specific things in the house that reminded us of him. And part of what was supposed to happen was all the children and grandchildren were supposed to be able to go through the house and pick out one thing that they wanted to take home with them. Now, this is what my father actually told me directly, okay? That's what he wanted to do. But I had another relative who actually got a lawyer to block that from happening because he wanted everything sold in the auction so he could get the money. See, that's greed. That's putting money above relationships. And this passage says that a greedy man stirs up dissension. Okay? Do you think we talk about that relative very kindly now when we talk about him? Well, yes and no. Okay? When greed takes precedence, people aren't happy. It doesn't bring you friends. It doesn't bring you other things. But if you trust in God, you will prosper. So my father, this is my favorite part of the story. My father decided to trust God, okay? Everything would go to auction. He knew. He asked me if there's something in the house I wanted, what would I want? My sister wanted what we call a china cabinet. It was a cabinet you set in your dining room and you put your fancy dishes and plates, okay? And so it had glass doors on it, and they were kind of rounded glass. It was a really nice little thing. And that's what she wanted, was my grandmother's, because she always remembered as a child that my grandmother getting dishes out of there for fancy dinners and everything else and all this kind of stuff. That's what she wanted. So they, they came to the auction. My dad was going to bid on it in order to get it for my sister. But my dad kind of used some wisdom. I don't know whose idea it was, but instead of him bidding on things, he had one of my great aunts bid on something. If he wanted it, he would let them know, and they would bid it. They kind of had a little secret thing. Well, they figured out that everything my dad was bidding on it at the beginning with, this other relative was bidding on it too. It's kind of like, I'll give you $1 for this. The other relative, I'll give you $2, $3, $4, $5, and he would bid them up. So when it came to this cabinet, my father figured that out, and so apparently he shared that with others and said, kind of watch this. And they knew what the price of it was. They knew if they went to an antique place where how much it was worth. So they watched, and sure enough, this relative kept bidding it up and bidding it up. So he kept having my aunt bid it up and bid it up and bid it up until it got to a really high price, and then my father backed out of it. And he said that was just, he just felt God was just patting him on the back at that point, because he said he trusted God. It was about money, but yet this relative ended up spending a whole lot more money than he should have on a piece of furniture that meant nothing to him. Now, I know that's a random story, and I'm telling random stories today. I'm not very focused. But the point of it is, you stir up dissension when you're greedy. You stir up trouble when you're greedy, okay? It doesn't help in any way, okay? When we talk about dissension, NIV calls it conflict. New Living Translation translates it as fighting. The English Standard Version translates it as strife. It just doesn't cause anything good. So, when we talk about greed, what's some questions we can ask ourselves? Well, do we spend our time thinking about money, how to get more money, how to have more things, how to get more for yourself? Those are signs that you may be a greedy person. Listen to this list. It was a list. I don't know how accurate this list is, because I didn't vet it or anything. And I have a question on it, because actually the title of the list I got was from a blog, and it is 12 traits of a greedy person, but then they listed 13. So who knows if it's good or not, all right? Which one does it reach their list? Lack of empathy for other people in their situation. Selfishness, being manipulative, hoarding resources, taking advantage of others, dishonesty and deception, sense of entitlement, seeking power and control, obsession with winning, never being satisfied, making impulse decisions. In other words, you don't think about the impact of your decisions on others or on the future. That you cause conflict, as our verse said, and you're single-sided, you're looking for immediate gratification. Those are signs that we're greedy. So consider our ways. Are you greedy or not? And then the next thing that Solomon has, it says that, hey, when we consider our ways regarding wealth, we need to be willing to work hard for our wealth, okay? And it's just, it's what we need to do. Hard work brings profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty, okay? Again, Rockefeller says this well, actually, I'll get this to you next slide. But when we talk about working hard, it is very, very important. But some people work hard, and they work so much, and they focus so much on wealth that they miss out on family, friends, church, other things. And we need to be cautioned against that. So look at this next part. It says, keep a proper perspective. Going back to what we said last week. And look at the verse. Don't wear yourself out getting rich. Be wise enough to know when to quit. That's keeping a proper perspective. Okay? Yes, we need to work hard, but there's only so much. Only so much. One of the pastors whose sermons I've listened to this last few weeks out of California said that he had a meeting with a man, and the man was a multimillionaire, very wealthy man. And he said that they had a lunch meeting, and said they were sitting there at lunch, and he said he asked him, he said, well, can I ask you a personal question? And the man said, well, yeah. He said, well, you're making money hands down right now. You're very wealthy. How do you know when enough is enough? And the man looked at him and said, it's never enough. You'll always need more. Okay? He's wearing himself out trying to get rich. He doesn't think he has enough. You can go back and apply, is that greed? Is that, all these other things as well too. But don't wear yourself out. Be wise enough one to quit. In a blink of an eye, wealth can disappear. For the spout rings and fly away like an eagle. Okay? It can be gone very, very soon and very, very easily. So, we have that. We keep a proper perspective. Look at this. Charles Stanley says this in the Life Principle Bible. It says, when we focus our energies on gaining wealth, we cannot focus our attention on gaining an intimate relationship with God. That's why Jesus said you cannot serve God and manna in Luke chapter 16:13. Let's read that verse. No one can serve two masters. You'll hate the one and love the other. You'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money. We go back several weeks ago when we talked about righteousness. We go back to last week and we go to this week. It comes down to this. When we talk about our perspective on money, does it get in the way with our relationship with God and others? If you don't remember anything else, that's the key. Does it get in the way? Don't let it get in the way. The Rockefeller quote I wanted to give you this is this: I know nothing more despicable and more pathetic than a man who devotes all the hours of the waking day to the making of money for money's sake. Even when you're earning money, keep a proper perspective. What's it for? It's to clothe my children. It's to feed my children. It's to provide housing. It's to be able to give to God. It's to be able to help people around me. That's why we do it. So making money is not wrong. Having lots of money is not wrong. But how we handle it. Consider your ways in what you do and how you do it. Then one last thing for you. Keep our perspective of wealth and its influence under control. We do this by considering the behaviors, our habits concerning our wealth, concerning our money. And then we do it through prayer. Because it takes more than just applying the principles. You can Google it. You can Google business science, you can Google personal finance. They'll give you all kinds of suggestions, all kinds of ideas. But you need to do it with prayer as well. That's why I think Solomon included this prayer in his passage. The prayer that we read at the beginning, the prayer we read last week, the prayer we're going to read again right now. We won't read it again next week. Well, I won't say that, but we may read it again next week. But look, let's read it again. Keep falsehood and lies far from me. Join me as we read it. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. Otherwise, I might have too much and disown you and say, who is the Lord? Or I may become poor and steal, and so dishonor the name of my God.